My remarks are entitled A Wonderful Flood of Light, words taken from a 1909 First Presidency statement on the doctrine of premortality. I hope and pray this will be a fitting doctrinal focus on an Easter evening as we celebrate the central event in the triumph of God's plans and purposes. Describing poetically our coming to earth while trailing clouds of glory is evocative imagery. Another writer, uninstructed by true doctrine, mused, quote, how everything is arranged in this life as though we had entered it carrying a burden of obligations contracted in a previous existence, obligations which seem to belong to a different world, founded upon kindness, which we leave in order to be born into this world, end of quote. C.S. Lewis declared, disgraced man may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship once he owned. However, so much more important than the faint glow emanating from such expressions as these is the striking and illuminating brightness of the restoration's revealed truths. It could not be otherwise, brothers and sisters, for as the prophet Jacob declared, no man knoweth of God's ways, save it be revealed unto him. The same previous First Presidency further stated, quote, the doctrine of preexistence, revealed so plainly, particularly in the latter days, pours a wonderful flood of light upon the otherwise mysterious problem of man's origin, end of quote. The doctrine of premortality declares, brothers and sisters, that before his mortal birth, man was also in the beginning with God. Intelligence or the light of truth was not created or made, neither indeed can be. Therefore, as identifiable individuals, you have been you for a long, long time. Furthermore, with important details as yet unrevealed, certain spirit elements of man are eternal and have no beginning, since intelligence or the light of truth was not created or made, neither indeed can be. The spirit of man, said Joseph Smith, is not a created being. It existed from eternity and will exist to eternity. So whether as a spirit son or daughter of our Heavenly Father, you were sent here from your first estate to undergo this joyful yet stressful mortal second estate. Being the literal premortal spirit children of the Father, you and I can, by going from grace to grace, eventually receive of the fullness of the Father, as Jesus did. In addition to being resurrected, we can become perfect, or in one set of meanings from the Greek, finished, completed, and fully developed. But only if we worship God and truly follow the example of our Redeemer, Jesus Christ. After all, brothers and sisters, the ultimate adoration is emulation. Small wonder the prophet Joseph Smith taught that if men do not comprehend the character of God, they do not comprehend themselves. However, such comprehending clearly requires an understanding of the doctrine of premortality. Therefore, we really are God's spirit children, indeed, and we do come trailing clouds of glory, which contain dim flakes of fire, still pulsating with borrowed light from our eternal home. In one form and degree or another, the vital concept of premortal existence is found in the Holy Bible, in early Christian documents, in Greek and Jewish literature, and in other sources as well. However, once again, only from the restoration, with its confirming, clarifying, and elaborating revelations, do we get the clear and definitive truths about man's origins. Thus, the plain and precious doctrine of premortality, in President Harold B. Lee's words, can provide an awakened realization of who we are. Brothers and sisters, think of yourselves not only for what you now are, but also for what you have the possibilities to become. President Joseph F. Smith said, through obedience, we often catch a spark from the awakened memories of the immortal soul, which lights up our whole being as with the glory of our former home. Then President Smith further instructed us by saying, notwithstanding the fact that our recollection of former things was taken away, the character of our lives in the spirit world has much to do with our disposition, desires, and mentality here in mortal life. This spirit influences the body to a great extent, just as the body in its desires and cravings has an influence on the spirit. Environment and many other causes, said President Smith, have great influence on the progress and destiny of man. But we must not lose sight, he said, of the fact that the characteristics of the spirit, which were developed through many ages of a former existence, play a very important part in our progression through mortal life. Someday, when the obscuring dust of history finally settles, we shall see much more clearly that gospel fullness existed in Adam's time, including the doctrine of premortality. This precious doctrine, along with other doctrines, suffered later diffusion and distortion. President Joseph F. Smith again observed, quote, undoubtedly, the knowledge of this law and of other rites and ceremonies was carried by the posterity of Adam into all lands and continued with them, more or less pure, to the flood, through Noah, to those who succeeded him, spreading out in all nations and countries, Adam and Noah being the first of their dispensations to receive them from God. What wonder then, continues President Smith, that we should find relics of Christianity, so to speak, among the heathens and nations who know not Christ, and whose histories date back beyond the days of Moses, and even beyond the flood, independent of and apart from the records of the Bible. End of quote. In developing real faith, the doctrine of premortality is a fundamental building block, just as is the doctrine of postmortality. This doctrine of premortality represents a profound response to man's search for meaning. Without understanding premortality, this life may seem puzzling. Some regard it as the inexplicable human predicament. Without knowledge concerning the preceding there and then, the injustice and the unevenness of the here and now cause some to call into question God's justice, along with his cosmic competency. Without an understanding of premortality, mortals often fail to make adequate allowance for the proving and tutoring dimensions of mortality. Life's trials are then used by some as an argument against God, instead of accepting these trials as something common to man, or as the needed tutorials which last but for a small moment. Without the perspective of premortality, instead of understanding that all these things shall give the experience, we can become drenched in doubt and wrenched by irony and adversity, lamenting, why me, why this, why now? Without the perspective of a purposeful mortality and of long-standing covenants between God and certain peoples, Israel's wanderings in Sinai would be a senseless sojourn. Instead, however, God really has plans for us mortals. These words from Deuteronomy, and thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee, to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, and whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. God's divine designs for mortality include to prove us herewith. Not so informed, however, then doctrinally deprived mortals, in Nephi's words, stumble exceedingly. For instance, a severe stumbling, a major misreading of reality, is evident in the attitudes of hopelessness on the part of those who say, mankind is destined to extinction. There is nothing we can do. Or, as another wrote, we have no personal life beyond the grave. There is no God. Fate knows no wrath nor compassion. Such mortal lamentations as these bring to mind, in contrast, the great and reassuring lines of Jacob concerning the precious perspective of divine truth. Quote, "The Spirit speaketh of things as they really are, and of things as they really will be."